Ladies and gentlemen, today I stand before you to speak on something powerful, something that has withstood the test of time. A woman who trusts God will never be put to shame. Now, life will challenge you. It will throw you curveballs, break your heart, and try to convince you that you're not enough. But a woman who trusts God is unshakable. She knows that no matter how fierce the storm, she is anchored in something greater. She's not moved by what she sees or hears. She believes in what is beyond the visible, knowing that God is always working behind the scenes, even when she can't see it. She understands that faith is not just a Sunday thing, not just a prayer when times are tough. Faith is what keeps her steady when the world tries to make her stumble. Faith is what tells her to keep moving when she doesn't know where the next step will land. It's what tells her that every setback is not the end, but just a part of the plan that God has for her. But here's the thing. Trusting God also means embracing His timing. Too many of us, too many women, feel the pressure to have it all figured out today. We want results now, and when they don't come as quickly as we expect, we start to doubt. But a woman who trusts God knows that delays are not denials. God's timing is always perfect. When the world tells her to rush, she learns to wait, knowing that what God has for her is worth the wait. And when that time comes, nothing and no one can take it away. Trusting God doesn't mean you won't experience pain, setbacks, or even failure. But it does mean that your story doesn't end in shame. The world might try to label you, try to point out your flaws, your mistakes, but none of that defines you. When you trust God, your shame is wiped away. You are not defined by your failures. You are defined by the grace and honor that God pours into your life. He covers you, He restores you, and He gives you the strength to rise higher than before. And it's not just about you. When you trust God, you are building a legacy. You are setting an example, not just for yourself, but for those who come after you. Your faith becomes the foundation for the next generation, showing them that no matter what the world throws their way, they can stand firm because their trust in God will never be in vain. A woman who trusts God becomes a beacon of courage and resilience for others to follow. So let me leave you with this. Don't let anyone or anything tell you that your trust in God will lead to shame. Your faith will carry you through, your strength will rise, and you will never be put to shame. Because when you trust in God, He will always be with you, guiding you, lifting you, and taking you further than you ever thought possible. A woman who trusts God in the face of adversity becomes a force of resilience that cannot be easily broken. Life will test her, pushing her to her limits. It might challenge her in ways she never expected, but there is something deep inside her that keeps her going, her unshakable faith. When the storms of life hit, when the winds howl and the rains fall hard, she stands firm. She knows that she is not alone in the struggle, that God is right there with her, guiding her, strengthening her, even when things seem impossible. It's not always easy to keep going when everything around you seems to be falling apart. The world often tells us that we need to have everything together, to be perfect, to be unbreakable. But a woman who trusts God understands that perfection isn't the goal. Trust is. She doesn't have to have all the answers. She doesn't have to have everything figured out. Her trust in God is enough. She knows that while the world might try to knock her down, her faith will always lift her back up. This kind of faith allows her to face challenges head on, with the confidence that even in her moments of weakness, she is strong. It's the kind of faith that says, I might not understand why this is happening, but I trust that God has a purpose in it. She may have doubts or fears, but they don't consume her. She faces them with courage, knowing that God is the one who sustains her, and with each step she takes, she grows stronger in her belief. A woman who trusts God doesn't just survive adversity, she thrives through it. Her faith gives her the power to look beyond her circumstances, to see the bigger picture that others might miss. She understands that the challenges she faces today are not permanent, they are temporary. She holds on to the belief that there's something greater ahead for her, that the struggles she faces are refining her, shaping her into the person she is meant to be. This is the strength of a woman who trusts God. She is unshakable, unwavering, and always moving forward no matter how tough the road may get. A woman who trusts God understands that faith is not limited to what can be seen with the eyes. It extends into the realm of the unseen, into what might not make sense at the moment. The world around her may tell her that if she can't see it, it doesn't exist, that if there's no tangible evidence, there's no reason to believe. But she knows better. Her belief is not based on the immediate circumstances or the present reality, but on the promises that God has made, even if they are yet to be fulfilled. This kind of faith is about stepping into the unknown with confidence. It's about moving forward without a clear path, knowing that God is leading her. She doesn't wait for all the signs to align perfectly. She doesn't need to have everything mapped out in front of her before she takes the first step. She trusts that with each step, God will reveal more of the plan, and that each decision she makes in faith will bring her closer to the purpose He has for her. In moments when doubt creeps in, when the situation seems bleak, it's the strength of her faith that pulls her through. She may not always have all the answers, but she knows that God does. She knows that even if the situation doesn't change immediately, God is still at work in the background, moving things, orchestrating events, and preparing her for what's to come. This kind of faith requires a deep understanding that not everything is meant to be understood right away. Sometimes it's about trusting that God sees the full picture, even when she can only see a small part of it. This trust also requires patience. A woman who believes in the unseen understands that sometimes God's timing doesn't match her own. There may be moments of waiting, of feeling like nothing is happening, but she knows that the waiting is part of the process. It's in these moments that her trust is strengthened. She learns that faith isn't about forcing things to happen on her terms, but about surrendering to God's plan and trusting that His way is always the best way, even when it doesn't look like what she imagined. Believing in the unseen also means that a woman who trusts God has a vision for her life that others might not understand. People may question her decisions, her choices, or the direction she's going in, but she doesn't need validation from anyone else. She walks forward with confidence, knowing that her steps are ordered by God. She may not have all the details, but she knows the direction, and that's enough. In a world that often values what is visible and concrete, she chooses to place her faith in what cannot be seen, knowing that true vision comes from trusting in God's plan, not the world's expectations. A woman who trusts God understands that divine timing is not bound by the constraints of human expectation. In a world where everything is rushed and instant gratification is the norm, she stands firm in the knowledge that God's plan for her life unfolds exactly when it's meant to, not a moment sooner or later. While others may be pushing for quick answers, immediate results, and fast-paced success, she has learned the value of patience and the importance of waiting for the right moment. She knows that God's timing is perfect, even when it doesn't seem to align with her own. There may be times when she feels frustrated or anxious because the desires of her heart seem so far out of reach, or when she can't understand why things aren't happening the way she imagined. But in those moments, she chooses to remember that God sees the bigger picture. What seems like a delay or a setback is often God preparing her for something greater, something that requires more than just her desire. It requires timing, preparation, and growth. It's easy to become impatient when life doesn't unfold the way we think it should. A woman who trusts God has experienced this tension firsthand. She has wrestled with the longing for things to happen now, for answers to come today. But over time, she has learned that waiting is not wasted time. God is using every moment to mold her, to teach her lessons that will be necessary for the future He has planned for her. She understands that there is wisdom in waiting and that the blessings she will receive will be richer because she trusted God in the waiting season. Sometimes, waiting for God's timing can feel uncomfortable. It might seem like everyone else around her is moving forward, achieving their goals, and finding success. But she knows that comparison only steals joy, and she has learned to trust in her unique journey. The pace of others does not dictate the pace of her life. What matters most is that she remains faithful in the waiting, understanding that God's plan for her is custom tailored to her own path. She doesn't need to rush because the steps God is taking her through are meant to equip her, refine her, and prepare her for what's ahead. Moreover, trusting God's timing brings peace. It's a peace that comes from knowing she doesn't have to force things or make them happen on her own. In a world that thrives on control, she has learned the strength in surrender. She doesn't have to wrestle with her circumstances because she trusts that God is in control. And in that trust, there is rest. She can move forward confidently, knowing that when the time is right, God will open doors that no one can shut and make a way where there seems to be no way. This peace comes from the assurance that the plan will be fulfilled at exactly the right time, and she doesn't have to hurry it. A woman who trusts God knows that delays are not denials. She believes that the dreams and promises God has placed in her heart will come to fruition not according to her timeline, but according to His. She doesn't just trust that things will happen. She trusts that they will happen perfectly in the time that's best for her. God's timing is a reminder that the right season is always worth the wait, and when that season comes, she will be more than ready. A woman who trusts God finds her strength not in her own perfection, but in her ability to embrace her vulnerability. She doesn't pretend to have it all together, nor does she hide her struggles. She is open about her weaknesses because she knows that in those very moments, God's strength is made perfect. Her trust in God doesn't mean she won't face hardship, but rather it means that in the midst of hardship, she is never alone. When the world tells her to be tough, to suppress her emotions, to put on a brave face at all costs, she chooses to be authentic, trusting that God will provide the strength she needs exactly when she needs it. In her vulnerability, she finds a deep courage. It's the courage to face her fears, to admit when she's broken, to cry when she needs to. But it's also the courage to keep going even when it feels like the world is falling apart. She knows that vulnerability doesn't make her weak. It makes her real. In embracing her imperfections, she creates space for God to work in her life, to transform her, to heal her. She doesn't have to be perfect to be loved or to be used by God. In fact, it's often in the places where she is the most vulnerable that God does his most profound work. This woman doesn't shy away from the challenges life brings. Rather, she faces them head on, knowing that each challenge is an opportunity for growth. Trusting God allows her to step into her weaknesses without fear because she knows they are not limitations. They are opportunities for God's grace to shine through. She doesn't need to have it all figured out, and she doesn't need to hide her struggles. She allows God to work through her in her moments of weakness, and that's where her true strength lies. Her vulnerability doesn't make her a victim, it makes her a conqueror. It is through God's presence in her moments of difficulty that she becomes stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. She understands that her struggles are not something to be ashamed of, but rather they are part of her story. Every challenge she faces, every moment of doubt or fear, is shaping her into the woman God has called her to be. She embraces her humanity, knowing that it's not her perfection that makes her worthy, but her willingness to trust in God and let him work through her, even in her weakest moments. And in her trust, she finds a profound peace. The peace that comes with knowing that God is not only with her in her strength, but he is with her in her vulnerability. He is near to the brokenhearted and offers comfort in the midst of pain. A woman who trusts God understands that her imperfections don't disqualify her from his love or his purpose. Instead, they qualify her for his grace, his power, and his unwavering support. When the world tries to tell her that she needs to be perfect to be valuable, she knows that her value lies not in her perfection, but in her trust in a perfect God who loves her, flaws and all. Through this, she discovers that true strength isn't about hiding her weakness, but allowing God to transform it into something beautiful. A woman who trusts God knows without a doubt that shame has no hold over her. The world may try to throw labels and judgments her way, attempting to define her by her mistakes, her struggles, or her past. But she understands that God's grace covers her in a way that no earthly judgment can. She is not defined by her failures or the opinions of others. When the world attempts to shame her, she remembers that in Christ she has been made new, and shame has no place in her life. Shame often tells a person that they are unworthy, that they have failed beyond redemption. But a woman who trusts God knows that God doesn't see her through the lens of shame. He sees her through the lens of love, mercy, and grace. Her trust in God reminds her that no matter how many times she's fallen, she is not a failure. She is a beloved daughter of the King, and that identity is unshakable. Her worth is not tied to her mistakes or to how others perceive her. It's tied to the truth that she is chosen, forgiven, and deeply loved by the Creator of the universe. This woman does not carry the weight of guilt or shame because she has surrendered it to God. She has recognized that while she may have stumbled, she is not condemned. Through her trust in God, she has been set free. She knows that God's love is not conditional on her perfection or performance. It is unconditional. When she faces the storms of shame, she leans into the truth of who God says she is. And that truth replaces the lies the world tries to tell her. Even in her moments of imperfection and struggle, she does not let shame consume her. Instead, she allows God to heal her. The shame that once tried to keep her bound in the past has been exchanged for the freedom and hope that comes through trusting in God. She understands that God doesn't just forgive her, he redeems her. Her past no longer has the power to dictate her future. She is no longer a slave to shame, but a vessel of God's grace and power. She walks in that freedom, knowing that the past does not define her, and the future is full of possibilities. Through her trust in God, she becomes a living testimony to others who may also struggle with shame. She is proof that no one is beyond the reach of God's redeeming love. Her journey from shame to grace becomes a powerful example of the transformative power of God's forgiveness. She encourages others to let go of their shame, to step into the freedom that trusting God brings, and to remember that they too can walk in the fullness of who God has called them to be, free from the burden of shame. In every aspect of her life, she carries this truth. No matter how many times the world tries to knock her down, no matter how often it tries to shame her, God has already lifted her up. She is never defined by her failures or shortcomings. She is defined by God's endless grace, His unfailing love, and the truth that she is His beyond all judgment, beyond all shame. And in this, she finds her true strength. In conclusion, a woman who trusts God stands as a beacon of strength, resilience, and grace. She faces life's challenges with unshakable faith, believing that even when she can't see the way forward, God is guiding her every step. Her trust in divine timing teaches her to wait with patience. Knowing that everything unfolds as it should, she embraces her vulnerability, finding strength in surrender, and allowing God to work through her weaknesses. And when the world tries to shame her or define her by her past, she holds fast to the truth that in God's eyes she is redeemed, loved, and free. A woman who trusts God becomes an example to others of what it looks like to live boldly, to walk in grace, and to move forward with confidence, no matter the circumstances. She shows that true strength is not found in perfection, but in trusting a perfect God. And she stands firm in the knowledge that no matter what life throws her way, she will never be put to shame because her hope, her strength, and her identity are rooted in the one who holds her and leads her toward a future full of promise, purpose, and peace. Let us all remember that when we trust God, we are never left to walk alone. His presence, His promises, and His love carry us through every trial and every victory. We are more than conquerors, and we will never be put to shame.